I'm going to skip the music, but Dean and Whitney, if you have anything that you want to say while the installation shots are going by.
That's my daughter in the green shirt.
I was wondering. I was wondering.
She had a lot of comments of what should go where.
It was beautifully hung.
I mean, it looks, yes. We were so excited when we walked in. Oh, I just want to look.
And I guess anybody hasn't seen the show, it's like the pictures are cool, but they don't do the show justice. Obviously, you have to go to the gallery, check it out.
Yeah, I went in one day just to drop some things off, and it's there. It just being within the space with all of this work. There's nothing like it.
Thank you. And a lot of traditional comics art is not that big. It's usually no taller than 15 inches, it's like 10 by 15, I think is the standard actual real estate for the page. And I personally work on 11 by 17 paper, which is like most comics art paper. But like Onur's piece right here is huge, sometimes there's a double page spread that we liked a lot of, or use the space of a double page spread.
But I didn't really look at the sizes when we were choosing.
No, I know.
So that's what was really surprising. And when we came in, and it's like, oh my gosh, like I didn't even realize this was so big. Like the one we just saw, that's right when you walk in, it's a huge canvas.
And there's one that's going to be probably coming up soon that's really big that I had no idea. I mean, it's a lot of panels on it, so amazing. It makes sense. But I mean, they drew it that big, unless they cut it up. And
the Superman one I didn't know was going to be that big. Yeah. It all looked.
And then there's a lot of there were a bunch of pieces that were really small that are almost drawn to print size, and
what I loved about the small ones was that you had to go up close to them. And so that gave you the opportunity to really read it,
Yeah. Also, just like comics are sometimes a certain economy of size,
I want these photos.
And yeah, I want these pictures.
Yeah. Oh, many of these.
I was going through them and I was thinking, like, what should I edit out? And I could not edit any of these out. These are great photos of you guys.
Oh wow, we even dressed alike that day.
That's right. Look at that.
Day too, guys.
But yeah, and that's another reason why it's important to go to the gallery, because unless you're picking up the published item, it is, a lot of them are small, and you do have to get up close to it, and that's another thing, it's a very intimate thing to create comics, because you're just like most art, Although I remember a long time ago in art school, the art teacher told everyone that they had to draw from their shoulder, to bend their arm and draw from your shoulder. I was like,
But what I really loved was that because there are, some of the pieces are smaller, like you have to step in to enter the world of that piece. And I love that.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
I actually thought that you planned the sizes, because we were so pleased that there was a variety of sizes to make the hang interesting.
No, we were a little ignorant because I knew that the sizes were there, but like you said, Whitney, like there were a couple pieces that were a lot bigger than we thought, and it was actually weird, even more impressive as an art object. Forget like it being like comics; it just became more of an art object. I think it was one of the things we're going to discuss here is, the difference between, I guess, fine art and comics, which there may not be that big a difference, to be honest.
Exactly.
I'm going to move in now into each image of each artist.
Great.
Oh, yay. Okay.
I'm gonna put on a fan.
So while we're doing this, let me just welcome everyone to 440 Gallery Artist Talk. So we do this every time there's a show, and we're so excited to have Whitney and Dean here with us, and 3 of the artists, but it's really important to see all of the artists. So we're going to move through all the artists in the show so that the viewers here get a chance to see it. And like Dean was saying, please, if you can, come and see them in real life, because it's really no comparison. But welcome, we're happy that you all are here. We're going to ask Dean and Whitney a few questions, and then we're going to ask questions of 3 of the artists. So enjoy.
Uh-oh.
Are we supposed to? comment
I
on
think we're going. Oh, I don't know if you want us to. Oh, did Bill go
Agreed.
home, Mindy? Bill's also down the hallway.
Yes, Bill has left the building.
Can I ask a question while we're looking at these, or is that okay?
Yes, please.
Is it I'm blown away by comic book artists, and Dean, you said you like to draw on 11 by 17 canvas. Is it an artist like a comic book snob thing to like do every page completely, like to do all the panels on one page as opposed to doing one panel on a separate piece of paper and marrying everything together digitally? Because the thought of like doing every page as a work of art and creating an entire page is to me daunting and terrifying. And that's what most comic book artists do, right? They do create the whole page at one time and they draw on one page.
Well, I think traditionally, and that's a good question, but I think traditionally, if you know you're drawing a 22-page comic or a 120-page graphic novel, each page represents a sequence of time, or a few pages equal a sequence of time, right? And then you're cutting up that time into panels or a splash page, or, you know, in this case, one of the things we want to exploit and celebrate was how you deal with the real estate of the blank page and how you show narrative, you know? And like in this case, Craig Johnson, you know, has 2 panels here. He's introducing a character and then he's showing, and then he's pulling back and showing an establishing shot. It's very cinematic in that way. But I do think that it's how you learn is from what came before. So it never occurred to me that you could just draw panels separately. I mean, in this case, look at Jeff Grogan's here, that you couldn't split that up. You know, you have to draw that sequence on the page in that way, which again was something we wanted to celebrate, right? But I do know some artists like Bob Fingerman and Howard Chaykin who have gone and drawn separate panels and then assembles it together into a page in the computer, you know?
Do you find that? Do you frown upon that? Do comic artists feel like that's cheating in some way, or?
It's not cheating, and I wouldn't necessarily say I frown upon it, but I don't understand it, because then you're just like, to me, I like to lay out the page first and see how it works all together, the panels, because why is one panel smaller than a big panel? And why would you put like 3 little panels in a sequence next to a bigger panel? Or why are you going left and right and then down, you know? Just want to make a comment about Jerry Ramirez at any moment. That's the biggest piece, I believe, in the show, and it's gigantic. And I do wonder, I didn't look close enough, but to answer your question, Onur, is like, I do wonder if he drew each panel separately and then pasted it onto this big board, because it's so big, it would be impossible to draw like on an art table. You know, that would be hanging over half your knees, you know, to draw this page as is. So, but I do think it's about how one panel impacts the other. I mean, look at this sequence, right? Sure, Joan could have drawn these 3 panels separately, but it's so beautiful. And again, there's a sensibility that's being conveyed here with the negative space and how she's walking through the page, you know?
Well, as a piece of fine art, I have to say, if I had the money to buy it, I was a collector, to me, if it's drawn as one whole piece, as opposed to being copy and pasted, I feel like that is more fine art than just drawing every panel separately and paste it up there. That if it's all done on one canvas as a whole, cohesive whole, it is more like fine art. I mean, just I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, you know?
Yeah, it leans into the fine art, but the thing that's funny about comics is that it was never meant to hang on a wall or be in a room to be ogled at, you know? Like, it really is almost a disposable art, or at least it used to be, wherein you're aiming for the book, the printed, you know, publication, and you know, up until recently that meant paper and killing trees, right? And now we have the digital wave, and we have web comics, which deals with the way we you know, show comics in space. Yeah, no, it's fascinating, because comics, was not something that anybody aspired to do, back in the 1930s and 40s. It was almost like an embarrassment that you were doing comics because you couldn't do fine art or real art in quotes, and a lot of people who created comics went to comics because it was a way to make a living, to tell these kind of, for lack of a better term, power fantasies for 12-year-old boys, and then little by small, it became more a serious art form. And it took many, many, many years. I mean, when I first liked comics, I was born in 1967. When I started loving comics at age 12, it was still considered like a bastard art form or for juveniles, and it wasn't until I guess Art Spiegelman's Mouse, or when they started to sell well, like DC Comics Watchmen, written by Alan Moore and drawn by Dave Gibbons, or Frank Miller's Dark Knight version of Batman, and it started to sell well and do well, that it became more serious and considered, hold on a second, formidable. Sorry.
Yeah, so let me just interrupt you there.
Yeah.
So you may have partly answered the question that I wanted to ask, but I just want to comment that I think this show is a testament to that old kind of
Sorry.
stereotype of comic art. It has faded, and that there aren't really rules. Like it seems like everybody in the show took a little bit different approach to how they lay out the page and how they approach the page and what size and what shape, everything. So let me say congratulations, Dean and Whitney, on a beautiful show. We're so pleased to have this genre that we haven't had on our walls before. And so we're really curious to hear about the experience from your point of view. So the question that came up at our gallery meeting when we discussed the current show was about the blurred line between comic and fine art. And what came up was Francisco Goya is known for sequential images and might have been considered the first comic artist with his etchings. And among other fine artists in history, like you were saying, Dean, sometimes they would be selling comics to periodicals to pay the bills. So what are your thoughts about the relationship? And when I look at these, I'm not thinking, oh, these aren't fine art. So I wonder, how you feel now that you're seeing them on the wall.
Well, do you have a thought? Because I can help address some
You
of the
go,
fine
and then
art stuff.
I'll fill in the,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, funnily enough, we've had this kind of art form since the caveman times, if you really think about it. People were using drawings to communicate ideas and narrative on walls, and then when that went away, because you could, I don't know, create oil painting, stretch canvas, or sculpture, or whatever, photography at some point. We left the walls and then started putting them back in rooms, at least in terms of fine art and art. But then comics kind of came back, or that is the narrative art, the sequential art, through comics, right? And I don't know, I feel like cinema and comics have always been hand in hand in some ways, but they tell stories differently, whereas cinema uses moving picture and sound to explore time. Comics do that with individual panels. And whenever I teach comics, I always talk about earning the next panel. Why are we going to the next panel, and what is it doing, and how does it impact the overall story? Anyway, so I don't know. I just feel like yet at the same time, we don't consider comics necessarily fine art. We have the Society of Illustrators that that celebrates not only illustration but comics art. There are certainly certain museums now that hang comics art or have comic shows. And whenever you look at the underdrawing or the initial studies for a lot of our famous paintings and illustrations, they look like cartoons to me. They look like comics art at least, so people have been making comics all their lives. And it's also, anybody can make comics. I think you're an example of that.
Well, that,
Whitney.
yeah, that would be the thing that I think the thing I love about comics is it's very accessible to everybody of all people, all ages. And not only that is, anybody can do it. So, I'm a writer mostly. I wrote a book for kids on how to make comics. I've talked to kids a lot about comics, but I also do make my own diary comics. I have no training at all as a visual artist. I'm a writer, definitely, but I do a daily comic, and it's possible. I can do it because comics are for everybody, and anybody can do it. That's what I love about it.
And even though that anybody can do it, it doesn't mean they can do it great, although I love what you do. But I'm looking at this piece that while talking, and look how amazing this is. Look at how they're exploring the blank page and where your eye moves around. And often it helps to follow where the words are driving you, but it's incredible. Look at that.
And it's non-traditional as far as comics, right?
Although I'd say comics are, getting more and more. Can you go back on this?
Tell Susan wherever you want to go. She'll take you
If you
there.
can go left, and Tom Galambis, who I think is on the,
You mean on that image? I'm not sure about that.
it's like
I
six,
can't move
it's
it
basically
around.
the same headshot that's kind of moving, it's a little more cinematic in that way. But there's a way to play with the page in so many different ways, and even down to a headshot. I don't know if anybody here knows who Harvey Picard is, who wrote a comic series called American Splendor. It was basically an autobio series that he did for over 30 years. He was one of the progenitors of memoir comics. And I once had a conversation with him because I drew a lot of his stories. And he would have been just fine if I just drew his head talking, because he did a lot of talking and pontificating and, or he'd be talking to another person. And so I always had to find what else was going on and what they were saying that I could draw, or move away from a talking head to a hand gesture, or what's in the room, or what's outside while things are happening, and there's so many ways to tell a story. One of the things I like to do as a teacher, because one of the things I teach is laying out, the story. Because to me, once you figure out the layout, that is the comic. Everything after that is execution. But the hardest part of comics is trying to figure out that space on the page, because you're dealing with sequence. As a single image, which is already hard enough to figure out a single image, then you can put more than one in a space. Now they could compete with each other, they could hurt each other, they could complement each other. It really depends on how you put it together. It's almost like a puzzle in a way, and yet what you're trying to do is boil it down in a fun and innovative way, so that it's very easy to read, so that there's clarity, there's narrative clarity, because otherwise you're just going to confuse people.
Right.
Yeah, so that leads me to my next question. What was your criteria? What was your experience of choosing the work for the show? How did you narrow down your selections?
Oh gosh, that was
hard.
difficult.
That was hard.
I think our criteria were it has to show some sort of.
It had to show sequential synergy.
Yeah.
Oh, here's
It had to
Tom's
be
piece.
there, yeah.
Which is the opposite of the piece we just saw, right? It's very, but I love it because it has this, it deals with behavior, and there's a certain, it's acting. There's a lot of acting when you read it in conjunction with, the words in the pictures. I think it also recommends the art of comics, even though it looks simpler,
But honestly, the process of narrowing down all the submissions was torture, and there were so Oh my gosh, so many good ones, and they were all like so very different. And oh, this is a great example of one that I love so much. And so yeah, we went through a few rounds trying to narrow things down, and we're told by the gallery that it was too small to fit all of the ones that we wanted to have. And in some cases, you know, artists may have submitted multiple pages that were incredible, but we had to pare those down. So, I mean, I think we were just looking for things that really spoke to us.
Here's Onur's piece, which looks different in the gallery
So different.
piece.
I didn't know, Onur, I didn't know what this was gonna look like.
Yeah,
And
this was the concept. This was the concept that I pitched, and the other piece looks better than this. I got to say, I'm embarrassed to be in the show because I feel like there's so many brilliant artists in this. I'm glad to be in this show, and I'm like really honored. But I feel like I'm the weakest link, and there must have been some artists who were pissed off that like they must have gone to this show and been like, what some of these pieces, like my piece is better than this. Look, I'm a filmmaker, I'm competitive. I'll go to film festivals where I didn't get into the film festival and see movies, and I feel like my movie's fucking better than that. But I'm really honored to be in the show. But yeah, my piece is different than that. But anyway, fascinating. I'm listening. I want to ask so many questions, but I'm keeping my mouth shut.
We're gonna go. We're gonna have a field trip with you. But if you go back a couple to the mommy meter, I wanted to talk about that for a second.
Oh, but I want to talk about
Like one could say, well, Dean, how is that a comic book page? You know, because it's really more of a gag cartoon, and a gag cartoon are like, you know, The Far Side or something that you might see in a newspaper strip or something, right? A single image. But what I like so much about it is that the 5 heads might almost could be different quadrants of time, like panels, even though it's encompassed into one frame, and it gives a sense of time, and it literally, you know. And I liked it because it felt like 5 panels in one page, you know, or one image.
And you also passed by, there's Mindy's page, and then right after it, I think, is Maurice's page, which we really liked because those aren't finished
Go back
comic
one, Susan.
pages. Those kind of do a great job. And Maurice showed me like the color, I mean, it's incredible, but those kind of illustrate the process that cartoonists go through.
And also I like, you know, because it's not just pictures, it's also text. And in comics, image is text, right? So you're having these competing things that are supposed to complement each other in kind of a perfect marriage. And I really like that if you know, when you're able to see this closer in the gallery, how the words are working with the image, you know, or the lettering.
Yeah.
And Marlene did just basically a collage of an absurd collage, like almost found objects, found images, and put together this like bizarre kind of like comics narrative of like what, cakes and pies and jellos and that look like hats, you know, like, again, kind of like unexpected. What was great about a lot of submissions were how unexpected and alternative they were. We didn't get too much in terms of what might be considered mainstream comics art, you know, which we also wanted to represent in this. So
we have Jerry's, which is
Jerry Ma's is a fun piece.
Yeah,
and he'll talk about it. This to me also, it's a single image, the swinging one, and yet it's doing a narrative thing. It's moving, and the lettering is also part of the art here, you know. Kevin Sacco's, which is next, again, it's unfair to try to look at it on the screen here on our laptops, but when you really look at it, this is just top quality, unbelievable. And what's really beautiful about this sequence, or these 2 sequences, and he had I think there were even more pages that we were trying to get more people in, so we had to knock some pages out of certain sequences. But even silent, it tells a story, you know. It's almost like a combination between comics and like animation.
Yeah.
And this was the cat. At first glance, you might not see that there are actually 5 panels, actually 6 technically, because the cat is its own panel. There are actually 6 panels that you're looking at in that image. That at first glance doesn't look like that. It looks like one piece, you know?
Great piece.
And what we're hoping too is that for people who might take comics for granted or just may not have really thought about comics, that they'll come and look at the show and go, wait a second, there's more to it than I thought. And hopefully be encouraged to want to make their own comics. Josh Shufeld, who's an old buddy of mine, I went to high school with, but he's a
Comics journalist.
A comics journalist,
Yeah.
a master cartoonist, and he was actually riffing off a famous American Splendor Harvey Picard story that R. Crumb drew, and then he did his version of this, of what is a name.
Dean, I'm sorry, can I chat? Can I just ask Dean, can I just say something, or am I?
Sure.
Well,
Okay, okay.
I wanted to make sure that all the artists got to speak. So what I was going to say is maybe this is a good point to move on to speak to the individual artists. And as other questions come up, put them in the chat or jot them down and save them to unmute after we ask our 3 artists their questions. And you know, maybe there'll be more questions for Dean and Whitney. And I also just want to say that that's kind of exactly what happened for me, Dean, that I'm looking at comic art in a whole new way. I don't know if it means that I'm going to make comic art, but who
Right.
knows?
Right.
Who knows?
No.
So let's start with Jerry Ma. Congratulations, Jerry, on your inclusion in Sequential Synergy.
Thank you.
We're going to ask each of the artists the same questions because each artist has such different approach that we're going to have very different answers. So let's start with, can you please tell us about your process? How do you create the work you do?
Well, I still like to draw on paper. So I do color, well, this piece in particular, I color digitally, but I try to start with an organic beginning and finish it off digitally, if you will. So it's on an 11 by 17 Bristol. I use some watercolors for the washes and stuff like that, and just did all the actual colors though in Photoshop.
Oh, so you're combining watercolor and Photoshop. That's so interesting. It's so painterly, and yet it is classic comic as well, right?
Well, yeah, you know, I'm actually not like such a superhero artist, so this was kind of more of a fun little thing for me to do. Also, as an Asian American, like with all these like Marvel movies and all that stuff coming out, there's really not too many like Asian superheroes. So I just wanted to have a piece that had the few handful of them that are out there on one piece.
Nice. So yeah, tell us about your inspiration. What inspired the narrative and what inspires your unique approach?
You know, so like every artist, I think inspiration comes from everywhere around you, you know, from your daily routines to the things that you see, the people you talk to every day. For me, I guess a lot with this whole pandemic thing, a lot of my inspirations come from the community as an Asian American because of all the racism that's been going on towards Asians.
Mhm.
So I've done a few things. I did a book called The Monkey King, and with some of that money we made from the Kickstarter, we actually donated a lot of it back to like 14 different businesses in Chinatown. I tried to do these like portraits of, since there's so much Asian hate and attacks on Asians, I tried to do like a portrait a day for a couple months on the unsung heroes that are in the Asian American community. So for me, at least, a lot of the inspiration is just coming from, you know, the community, the people around me, the things that are kind of motivating me.
Beautiful. Did you want to tell us anything more about this particular image?
You know, really, I just wanted to have fun with it. Like I said, I'm not like a big superhero artist at all. So this was kind of a little bit of a stretch, if you will. I picked a couple of these characters I grew up with. Some of them are newer. It was pretty fun to just throw them onto one piece of paper together, and as if I don't know if Marvel would ever let them all hang out together like this, but it'd be kind of fun to imagine and see if they did what it would be like. Those lanterns, I know they just look like arbitrary like Asian lanterns, but that's actually from in Chinatown. They hung those lanterns up to light up, Chinatown at night. So it's still good. Pearl River Mark, they put up these lanterns, I think like once every few months in Chinatown, and they light it up each night so that, well, to create a little bit of safety, but also to bring a little more beauty to the streets there.
Oh, how nice. And yeah, I just wanted to say about this, your palette is unique in the selection of work in the show. It really stands out.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been working as like a graphic design art director for a little while, and I've just I always like to have a little more fun with the colors, try to do something a little different. I just thought it'd be kind of, so a friend of mine, Cliff Chang, we used to work in the same studio together, and he always told me when we were working, like, the sky doesn't always have to be blue, the clouds don't always have to be white, the grass doesn't always have to be green. You can make it whatever, as long as it still represents what you're trying to do, and as long as it stands out from every other thing on the page. And when he told me this was like, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 years ago or something, like when he told me that, and it really did kind of like just turn a switch off in my head. And I started doing all sorts of weird colors, and it just seemed to look more fun,
It really does. Well, thanks so much, Jerry. I see a bunch of questions have come up, but we're going to circle back. So let's move on to the next artist. Gina. Gina, congratulations on your inclusion in Sequential Synergy.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Dean and Whitney for choosing my art, and 440 Gallery for showing it. It's a real thrill, really exciting. So thank you.
You're welcome. So happy to have you. Can you please tell us about your process? How do you create the work that you do?
Well, most of my comics, usually I just end up in my sketchbook. I just get an idea and, I'll come home into the studio and draw it out. And this actually, I did specifically to submit to the gallery. I get the emails from the School of Visual Arts alumni, and there was a call for artists. So I wanted to do something to submit it. It would be, a great thrill to show comic art, because I always loved it. And I love the Universal monsters. So I wanted to do something with the creature, something funny. And my comics usually are funny, which is kind of different from a lot of the stuff in the show. It's really interesting.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And yeah, yours stands out too, and its playfulness, I think.
Thank you.
The creature tails, kind of symbolic logo there seems like it might be a series. Is that true?
Now I'm thinking maybe yes, it should be. It might be fun to do more. People were asking me if I was going to do another one, and maybe I will.
There you go. So there's some inspiration. Can you tell us about your inspiration in general? What inspires this unique approach of yours?
Oh, unique approach. Well, I guess all the comics that I read growing up, and I still read, all of the Peanuts comics and Calvin and Hobbes and Mutts are great, still being drawn. And I get inspiration from all the people around me and my family and friends, ridiculous things they say, and I just try to make up funny drawings, I thought about maybe getting all my sketchbooks together and pulling out all the comics that I did in them, because it was so cool to get some recognition. I thought maybe putting a book together. I never did anything like that.
It's a great idea.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
And
I'd love to see that.
The kids coming into the gallery have responded to this piece also.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Just FYI.
Thank you.
So again, I see some more questions coming up for you, but we'll circle back to all the questions. So let's move on to last but not least, Onur. Congratulations, Onur, on your inclusion in Sequential Synergy. Can you tell us about your process, how you create this work that you do?
Yeah, I'd like. We can't put the image from the actual gallery montage earlier, can we? Because that's the actual. If not, it's not a problem.
And Susan, can you go back to the?
If you can find that, it's a better, more realized version of it. If you can't, I think it's in the actual montage from earlier. If that's not a problem. Process, Dean was telling me about how he'll plot out like the outline quickly, like sketch wise, like on a very small piece of paper, just all the panels, right, Dean? That's what you'll do sometimes. I found myself doing the same thing, as I just had several pieces of paper and I quickly tried to sketch out like what the story would be. Good. That's it right there. The one before. Yeah. So I like to think in terms of the piece before.
Back one.
If you can go back, if not, if you can't go back, that's fine.
No, the other way.
The other way.
Okay.
Yeah.
There it
So
is.
on the right. Yeah. I was thinking in terms of story. If the last artist talks about her love for Universal monsters, I have to say I've always had I've been a huge fan. It's a big cinematic love of mine is Universal Pictures Jaws, the movie from the 1976. Like the creature feature of Jaws and the shark has always been a big love of mine. And I've been drawing sharks since I was very young. I remember my mother having dinner parties and I would draw pictures of sharks eating people to the delight of like everyone at the dinner party. So I was always encouraged. I've always loved the shark, just drawing the shark. So it shows up in a lot of my work. So, for me, if I have an opportunity to submit something to this great show, for me, like just drawing something, a shark is that was second nature. That was going to happen. That's why I loved the piece before. I feel like she and I would have a mutual love of monsters, and if she's a fan of Universal monsters, like I would buy. By the way, if you do a graphic novel, if you ever do a book, and you should, I would buy it.
Thank you.
Yeah, especially if there were monsters in it. You know what I mean? And like, if there was a wolf man growling around and eating people or something, or causing chaos, I would love that. Or Frankenstein, Dracula, Creature from the Black Lagoon, of course. So the process was really basically very simple. I mean, I am not a comic book artist. I'm not a fine artist. I'm an amateur artist. But I do think in terms of I'm a filmmaker, so to me, the juxtaposition of images represent the film edit in movies. And of course, I've read Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, which I've never thought about graphic novels or comic books being like cinema until I read that book, but it's so true. I'm in awe of the comic sequential artists. Not only that, but I have to say too, I'd love to bring this up in a discussion too, is what is more valuable to people? Is it dialogue? Is it the writing? Is it the characters? Because I find that graphic novelists and comic artists are such great writers of dialogue. And because I think probably graphic novelists are very confessional, or comic sequential artists are confessional in their creation, it's very therapeutic. It's very, very personal and deep. I'm just fascinated by all that. I'm really happy to be included. But yeah, my process, as you can see, done very quickly, very raw, and going back to primal loves, which is Jaws, the movie Jaws. And also, there's a lot of pregnancy in my a lot of the other art that I do. In the time of Roe versus Wade and all that stuff, I wanted to have something that had a nod to it, or a very, very subtle wink to the idea of extracting, saving a man, the irony of saving a man by a pregnant woman, those kind of things, Yeah. So,
well, yeah. You have a lot of references in here. It totally made me think of Jaws, but thankfully with so much whimsy and none of the terror.
If anybody is a fan of Jaws, you might remember like the mayor saying, I'm not going to have that shark cut open and the little Kidner boys spill out all over the dock. If there's any Jaws fans out there, that is probably what this is. My very fanciful, sprightly version of what that might look like, in a celebratory way, not a disgusting, sad way, but celebrating the exhuming of a saving of a person from a shark. Anyway, yes, but a lot of
Yeah.
fun to do, a lot of fun to be a part of the show. Yeah.
I appreciate the whimsical and
Yeah.
not making it gross and sad. Thank you. Um, so yeah, you kind of did talk about your inspiration, but I wonder if you can answer your own question about the relationship of comic and cinema.
Yeah, well, for me, I was trying to think. When I write, I try to write in the traditional 3-act structure. So I want there to be, you know, the first act, you're compelled by it by the end of the first act. So I wanted this to be into 3 acts. So the first act is man thinks he's going for a nice dive and he dives into the mouth of a shark. Is he suicidal? Is he doing it on purpose? I don't know, but that is the tension of the first act. Second act, is he dead? Is he alive? What's happening? Someone catches something. And so anyway, I was thinking in terms of 3-act structure and telling a story in that way, so that if there's someone who is willing to stand in front of this for 15 seconds or 20 seconds, they might go on the journey and first act, second act, just actually experience it as a 20-second little short film in a way, you know? So I guess unconsciously, that's what I might have been trying to do, I think, in some way. Yeah, you know? So yeah.
And yeah, I think, well, I mean, aren't a lot of films made with storyboards to begin with?
Well, but you know, these comic book artists, I'm sure a bunch of people here, if they're not doing storyboards for TV or film, they probably should, because they, you know, that's good money, I think. Not that it's all about money, but I think a lot of storyboard artists make a lot of comic book artists make excellent storyboard artists, you know, because I look at these pieces and they're so cinematic. Like, you think, I could see that as a camera shot. I could see that as I could just see that as a movie. You know, some of these things, if you shot them the way they're drawn, would probably make excellent films, you know? It's like, I just think it's wonderful that to me, like, people, they argue that film is not a true art form because there's so many elements to it, so much relying on other people and money and so many things that can go wrong. With film, with comic books and fine art, you have a lot of control over what you're doing. And I feel like, to me, the comic book artist is the novelist, the filmmaker merged into one. I'm in awe of it. I wish I was talented enough or focused enough to do something, you know, and yeah, anyway, I'm just, yeah. So I feel like because I'm such a lover of cinema, and reading a graphic novel is almost, it's like experiencing a more personal, deeper way of watching a film, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I just love it. I love the experience. And you can like experience a graphic novel. It takes about 6 hours to 12 hours to read a novel. A graphic novel takes about 90 minutes to 2 or 3 hours. You know, you kind of experience it like a movie. So I am just, again, I'm beholden, and I'm so honored to be here. I wish, again, I feel like I don't want to talk much because everyone else should be talking. I'm very honored to be on this panel with such talented people. And you know, I'm not a comic book artist, but I am a big lover of it. And I think I'm amazed all these, you know, all these superhero movies, all the IP, and everyone's rushing to make superhero movies. By the way, that Asian piece, the superhero piece, which I really loved, not that it's all about money. You should think about doing a graphic novel based on that. Whatever, they already exist. Like, you know, is there an Asian X-Men or something? Because like, that's fucking fantastic. Not that that's important, but it's amazing to me. All these comic books are made into superhero movies, but why aren't they taking all these great graphic novels out there? And now look, I mean, you experience the graphic novel but I mean, so many, I think about the graphic novels that I love. Why aren't they made into movies? Now, maybe the comic book artists are being proprietary about it and they don't want anybody to take their work and bastardize it. But I would love to see some of these amazing graphic novels and really obscure ones made into films with really cool indie actors or big actors with great directors and great writers. And probably the comic book artists themselves could adapt their own comic into the script very easily, because I just think, again, the nuance and the dialogue, I read very few scripts where these writer directors have a knack for dialogue like comic book writers do, and a sense of timing and a sense of just an impact of the visual image plus timing and nuance. I love it. I'm very influenced by graphic novels. I think they influence my work. My movies are very dialogue driven and neurotic. My characters are very neurotic. And from what I found, I'm very sexual and perverted at times. And what I found from graphic novels is there's a lot of that in graphic novels, which I fucking love so much, so much. So.
Well, thank you so much, Onur.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
That I'm going to throw that question back to Dean, because I think you raised such an interesting quandary about the so we were talking about fine art and comic, but what about cinema and comic? Because maybe Onur is right. Is that true that a graphic novelist wouldn't really want their work to be turned into a movie because the
I don't know. It's up to the person. I think Onur's right though. Like I would even hazard to say I think there is a lot of movies being made today that are loosely based or based on graphic novels or IP or whatever. I do think that I like to think of it like this: as an artist, you've made your version the first time, and then you can adapt these things into movies, any other kind of medium. And that's what that is, an adaptation. It's changed, it's altered. Right now, there's a TV show on Amazon Prime called The Boys that's based on a comic book series. And it took the ideas from that and then updated them for today's, modern consumption. And I know that some people might be like, well, that's not pure to what it was originally. It's like, no, it doesn't matter. It's updated, it's adapted, and you got to get over yourself, so. Or you don't sell the rights at all. But I do think in today's publishing, the first thing that comes up in the contract is multimedia rights, because they a lot of publishers are buying to sell to movies. That used to not be the way. You used to make comics for comics' sake. And now a lot of people pitching. So everyone it's in a lot of people's heads today that, oh, I'm going to make a graphic novel so it can turn into a movie, or I'm going to take dust off my screenplay that I didn't sell, I'm going to make it a comic first so I can sell it as a movie. But what I love about a lot of the artwork in this show is that I don't get that sense from some of these artists. I get the sense that what you see is the way it lives and the way it'll probably ever live forever, not necessarily on a wall, but they're comic, and there's a purity and a rawness to that, and a vulnerability. I don't know if while you were looking at some of the artwork, comics used to be hand lettered, and there are some hand lettered pieces in this show. But nowadays, lettering is often done after you scan the artwork in, or it's already produced digitally. It's lettered later. So you're creating a negative space. And I don't know, even in Jerry Ma's piece, who's laughing right now about something, there's actually negative space where you can think, oh, that's where the words might go, or a title, And so notice that in some of the artwork that there seems to be an extra negative space, but that's because that's where the words were going to go, usually.
Thank you for pointing that out.
You might notice that and go, well, wow, that's weird that there's negative space there. And that's because it's not finished yet. The comic's not done.
Yeah. So I guess we're in a time of change.
Yep. So, I mean, listen, at the end of the day, Onur, by the way, is a fantastic filmmaker. Look his name up, go find his movies. He's great. At the end of the day, what's great about comics is it really is you and a piece of paper or your digital iPad, and no one telling you what to do if you don't want to, and expressing yourself, and you could show it to someone or not. And it's just you and time. That's it. It's not necessarily money. Because it's so easy. Take a crayon and a napkin. I'll draw comics at a bar while just sitting and hanging out with friends. It's so innate to most people, to be able to produce.
That's true. Thank you, Dean. So now I'm going to go to the chat where there's a number of questions. So Dustin Rogers says,
sorry to interrupt. Alan Dorson has been waiting to ask a question patiently from the beginning.
Okay.
Hey,
Alan.
first, Dean, are we going to get an exclusive about the Red Hook adaptation right here? So,
I'm working on it someday, maybe. And I wrote and drew a comic called The Red Hook, which I may revisit someday. That's basically a web series on Webtoon. It's on your phone right now, or your laptop, or iPad. You can read it for free. I did 4.5 seasons, and that is something where, yeah, that could be up for grabs, in terms of adapting and turning it into some kind of IP that, makes me money while I sleep, which I could use right now.
And
But
Dean, that was one of the comic books, right? Where first it went digital and then it went to print, which a lot of comics are doing right now.
right.
Can you
And I
talk a
drew
little
it for
bit about
print. I drew it for print and then put it up digitally first in the format that it needed to be in a vertical scroll. And then it came back, and then it came out in print as intended. Yep.
Oh, interesting.
So in your show, Dean, this is my last question. In this show, you talked a little bit about I saw that there was not a lot of superheroes. Jerry's was the only Jerry's and Arlene's was the only two
Right.
really any pieces with superhero. Is that because you didn't get a lot of submissions for superheroes, or did you make that conscious decision not to put
Oh,
superheroes?
no, I would have happily put more superheroes in, happily. If it was good enough and met the, right? Same with you?
Oh yeah, I don't think we got a lot of superhero themed stuff that I can remember.
And I did share it on my social media to a lot of superhero artists, and maybe they were like, and maybe I don't know if they're what a cartoonist might think about. They're like, oh, you want me to submit something to be hung on a wall, to a
Yeah.
gallery?
Because I would also say this is the first time most of these artists have ever seen their work on the wall of a gallery. Most of the, which I think is very exciting, and it was just on Saturday amazing to see just how blown away so many people were. Yeah,
It does recontextualize the work by hanging on a wall. And I'll say this, I did notice one guy I know who works at a major comic book publisher was scouting the walls for artwork and taking pictures and writing down names so that he could possibly reach out and hire some people just by coming to the show.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed for people in the show.
I have to give a quick shout out to Ellen Chews, I don't know if anybody can see Ellen, raise your hand, but Ellen's the reason why we did this at all initially. So she has a studio right around the corner from us. And after getting to know us and us getting to know her, I think we somehow put an omniscient bug in her bonnet about comics. Speak to that, Ellen, I guess.
Well, it just seemed that we always have a theme show every year that's open to outside artists. And, after 15 years, we've used a lot of themes. And this seemed to be a new theme, something that would draw new artists and new visitors to the gallery. And Dean and Whitney are so great. They're just the world's most wonderful studio neighbors. So,
Thank you.
yeah,
So
it turned out to be a really wonderful thing. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen. So back to our chat questions. So Dustin Rogers says, this is a real joy to see. As an art and comic lover, it's great to see the recognition of comic/sequential art as art. All artists are seeking to tell a story or elicit an emotion. Side note, I have more original comic art hanging in my home than any other art form. So it's kind of a statement, but thank you, Dustin. That was very true. So Onur says, when Dean is encouraging other folks to make art, why is that important? Is it because lots of graphic comics are therapeutic? It's cathartic to make comics, no? It would lead to a healthier society if more people made comics, art, and purged their neuroses.
I meant to say confessional instead of therapeutic. Like, it seems like a lot of graphic novels are kind of confessional, which I think are therapeutic. I'm curious because Dean said something in the terms of hopefully more people will make their own comics. This show will help encourage people to do that, which I'm a big believer in. Everyone should be. It's very egalitarian comic book artists. Like you can do that. Anyone can get a piece of paper and a pencil and draw something out. Again, I think it's very primal, going back to the hieroglyphics, which you guys were talking about earlier too. So I don't know, art is therapy. And again, I'm drawn to graphic novels because they're very confessional. And I'm a big Woody Allen fan in terms of cinema, and the idea of like making something directly about yourself, putting it out into the metaphor of a story. And also the fact that Dean's Harvey Picard, was brilliant.
Drawing
That,
for Harvey kind of encouraged me, or reading Harvey or confessional comics or autobio encouraged me to do it as well. But I was kind of half kidding. I kind of would rather people didn't do comics so that I wouldn't have to compete.
Yeah, well, but there are more comic book artists than ever, right? It has grown. I mean, it's just like filmmakers, because it's gotten cheaper, and because comic art has become popular. More people are doing.
The funny thing about making comics, or whenever I talk to someone these days, or in the last 15 to 20 years, and I'll say I work in comics, they're like, "Oh, I always wanted to do comics." I'm like, "You did? You always want?" Like everybody I meet, like. Yeah. Ultimately says how they had a secret desire to make comics. Yeah. But like 20 some odd years ago, they wouldn't be saying that because it wasn't cool. Like comics were not cool. Now they're cool, and now they've become a business, more so than ever before. Like every book publisher now has an imprint with a that sells and produces comics. So I think, and then also the nerds, and I was never a nerd. But not that everything against
you are now. You weren't maybe then. You're definitely a nerd now.
But the nerds grew up to sit in the seats, the CEO seats of Hollywood now, which is why I think, because they grew up loving this stuff and going, "Where's my?" We had Superman and Superman 2, right? And Superman 2 was the godfather of superhero movies for so long.
Sure.
And now it's every week there's something like. Not as good necessarily Superman 2, but comparable, it's bananas to the point it's becoming a deluge, right? So I think you're right, Onur, in that as much as I love superheroes, they're going to kind of wane for a little bit. And then we're going to have more like individual alternative kind of anti-heroes or just telling stories about ourselves, like, that come from comics.
But to answer your question, I don't think Dean encourages people to make stuff because it could be therapeutic. I think it's just because Dean loves community more than anything, and loves encouraging people. And I also, I think that's one thing we do have in common, is we just want people to make things and find ways to creatively express themselves. But it is a side. I mean, look, I never made a comic until we started sharing a studio together. What am I doing? Like, why am I like? I make comics every day now, but it does have like a little benefit on the side of, I do think like for me personally, making comics has helped me during these last couple of years.
But you're shifting now to film. You want to be a filmmaker. You're like, that's what you're shifting to. So you'll be able to, because it is about words and character for you, and they're terrific, but that is, you're going to be able to have more control over the film medium than probably what you could. I mean, you could probably open it up. You have to go. Are you going to try to do that with your characters? Are they going to be still talking heads, or having them moving through a space? You're going to try to learn how to draw, interiors and furniture and blocking. Are you going to do that? I think you're going to do that in the film world. You'd rather do that in the film world probably than the drawing world. I don't know. I would assume, because you're a writer of words. That's where.
Yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely a writer first before everything else. So I think I'm open to any other way to express myself and to get people to pay attention to what I'm writing. Yeah. But we've been doing film and other things too. Yeah, for sure.
And you love it though, right? You love making movies, don't you? Don't tell me you don't love it.
I mean, I do love, sure, yeah. I do.
We love storytelling. I think it's storytelling, and then different mediums have their different virtues. And so if I was to write a story, I'd have to figure out, if I want it to be prose, how is it prose? If it's a comic, how do I make it a comic? If it's a movie, how do you make it a movie? Because there are different ways of telling that story depending on the medium, And I think ultimately, storytellers are going to figure out how to tell a story no matter the medium, and I do think if you're not just writing prose and you want to start to visualize it, comics is a good way to and cheaper way to figure that out,
And it is a way. I mean, I was a journalist for a long time. I still sort of am, but I wrote about everything, like, film and comics and music and everything. And one thing I do like about comics is cartoonists generally have a lot of control over their own story. And when you move into film, unless you're doing it all yourself, like, you don't necessarily have that. And you know, when there are a lot of people, but
I would disagree with you a little bit on that, because as a low budget filmmaker, there's so many things I want to do, you know, but I just don't have the budget to do it. So, and in time and money is a big resource. Now, same thing. If I was a graphic novelist, or I could do comics, I would think, oh, there's so much I want to do, but you have to have a broad understanding of visual, like how to create a world through drawing. And I'm so limited, you know, with what I can do comic book wise, drawing wise, with my own abilities to create depth or interiors, exteriors, whatever, tell a story. I could do it very simple. I could do it very like Charles Schultz, or not comparing to Charles Schultz, something very simplified. Or like your work as well, Whitney, which I really love, telling a story in a very simple way. But again, that is a low budget version. Not low budget, I'm not saying it's cheap, but you know what I mean? You are limited. You might want to do more, but because, you know, Dean, you can draw anything.
Onur,
It blows my
Onur,
fucking mind. You can create any world that you want.
You're reminding me when I think in terms of writing a script for film, I do think of low budget way of doing it. But when I write a script for comics,
because you can do, of course, because you're a $50 million. If your comics were movies, they'd be $50 million movies. And when you draw, it's that you have that.
I would say
there's limits.
The blank comic book page has an unlimited budget. That's what I always say about comics.
Sure.
Do what you want, you know?
Yes, it's true. That's true. That's good. You know,
and comics have been very prescient. Like Jack Kirby alone, look him up, has invented so many ideas and that he threw away that have come true. And, you know, just because you're exploring ideas with fantasy, science fiction, superhero, whatever the genre is, like you just explore ideas and see what happens, you know? Yeah. And that's the beauty also about comics. It's just to throw a dart at the wall and see what happens, you know?
Yeah, and it only costs you time. It doesn't cost money, because that's the thing about film, you know, and the stress, finding investors, finding someone to back it, all the stress that goes with it. Then you have to compromise. It's all about compromises. It's not really a vision, because you're kind of shaping it as you go. I assume a lot of comic book artists shape it as they go too. It is a blank canvas after all. You're figuring it all out. But
and let's also say that all artists are shaped by their limitations.
Yeah.
And we put our own limitations on, even to help create more tension to push us forward.
Right.
So I want to make sure we get through our 21 messages here. So Kevin Sacco says, Jerry is the best. Check out his other work. Shout out to Jerry. Onur says, does he see himself as a superhero because he's so talented? Were you talking about
the gentleman who did the Asian superheroes? Yeah, that very talented gentleman, very talented. I wonder if he feels arrogant or above people or superior based on the talent that he has. I know, it's a fun question, and I'm sure he'll say he's very modest, but he could be lying. Watch that guy. I don't trust. I asked that question out of absolute admiration, of course.
Wait, is that a real question?
Real question.
It's a real question. You're proud of yourself as a comic artist. When did you start drawing and you feel empowered? I feel like it's a superpower. You draw pictures for people. People think it's magic sometimes, especially kids. You guys have drawn in front of kids before, right? Kids will, anyway, the comic book artist, the illustrator is superpower. I think it's a befitting question because of what he drew, you know?
And
Jerry,
Jerry, also Kevin Sacco concurs. He said he should. His Monkey King is a masterpiece.
Well, I mean, for me, I think whenever you draw or do any type of creative work, right, it should always come from something personal, something connected to your life in some way, even if it's just like began with a story that your mom told you when you were, 8 years old or something like that. So speaking about the Monkey King, for me, that's been, my mom used to read it to me, and that's like the oldest Chinese superhero. I think it's the oldest superhero ever created. So it's a free license, so meaning anybody can draw it or tell a movie of it. And if you go onto Netflix, you'll see there's like 100 different movies of the Monkey King. So every year they update it and they make it like into some new kung fu movie, but actually has nothing to do with kung fu. So I wanted to do a Monkey King version where I updated it and put him into Chinatown, New York. And the original story is where he travels west to India to learn about Buddhism. So in my version, he travels west to San Francisco to learn about like yoga and emo stuff and bring it
Oh,
back
wow.
to New York.
So can we find that if we search your name?
I mean, it's probably like you and maybe like 3 other people might be interested. So yeah, maybe I guess maybe I could probably.
Well, now
Are you kidding?
uh,
I'm totally
your
interested.
fans
I
are
can't
growing
wait.
here.
I can't wait.
Fans are
Sounds
growing.
amazing. Sounds incredible.
And Onur also says you should do a comic based on the piece in the show.
Yeah, are you gonna create that as like a 30-page comic and do it?
No, he's
issue
not
one?
allowed to. He
He's
can't.
not.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I know that's a bullshit question. You can say that's so dumb. Fuck you, Onur. But he
No,
doesn't
no,
agree
those are Marvel characters.
Are they
Yeah,
Marvel? Are they
I would-
Marvel characters? Okay,
I'm absolutely not allowed to do that.
Oh, I thought they were original characters that were. So that stretchy character, that's a Marvel character, right? It's not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Miss
Okay,
Marvel.
okay, gotcha. Okay, okay, I didn't know that. Okay, yeah, okay.
Brianna Collins says to everyone, Cliff Chang's colors are amazing. I think in relation to looking at Jerry's.
Cliff is the man.
Cliff is great. He's doing a great comic right now for DC called Catwoman: Lonely City. That's doing kind of what Frank Miller did with Batman and Dark Knight, where he's kind of imagining an alternative future, an older Catwoman. That's great.
That sounds incredible.
It's really, really
Yeah.
well done. And he also he's done a lot of comics, but he illustrated a series called Paper Girls, written by Brian K. Vaughan, who's also is writing a great series called Saga. And Paper Girls is coming out as a TV show right now. And yeah, Cliff's coloring is really good. I like a limited palette, and I would hazard to say that Cliff and kind of like Jerry Ma's piece is kind of a limited palette where it doesn't use all the colors, and it has a certain tone.
So is Brianna's piece.
Oh, and
In the
Brianna.
show. Yeah.
Wait, what? Oh, yes, that's right.
Yeah,
Your
yeah.
piece in the show. I thought you meant
Yeah.
Cliff colored it.
No,
or
no,
something.
no.
Oh, yeah. No, I
Your-
think
your work in the show. Is
I think that's
awesome.
another thing that like alternative artists like to do is to limit the palette, the color palette. That is.
And so Kevin is also pointing out that Jerry will be at New York Comic Con. Be sure to visit.
Absolutely.
I think you have a big fan here, Jerry. Brianna Collins says, Gina, I love this piece. I feel like it's if The Shape of Water was a sitcom. Oh, I like that. Yes, I
I
get
feel
that.
bad. I never saw that movie.
Oh, really?
Thank you,
If you
Brianna.
like Universal Monsters, I think you'll like
I
it.
know. Really?
Yeah,
Oh, absolutely.
it's a
Sure.
beautiful movie.
I should check it out. I can't believe that I missed that. It's like a contemporary creature, right? Creature. of
Yeah.
Black Lagoon.
Mhm. It's a
Yeah.
period piece, but it's a really interesting.
Brianna, what piece did Brianna do? Brianna, what piece did you do?
Brianna. You there?
Yes, I had a piece in the show. It was black and white with some red in it as
Was
well.
it wasn't the fingernails, was it?
No.
Okay.
It was,
It was in the window.
the window,
And it was like trees with some figures.
like a hand coming out.
Yeah.
Do you do comics yourself, Brianna, or you do you graphic comics? What's the one that we should look out for? Do you mind if I'm sorry to ask? Do you mind if I ask?
I don't have anything at the moment, but that piece is from a graphic memoir that I'm working on.
You're working on, right? Oh, that's great. How long you been working on it? How many years or months?
Almost a year now.
When do you think it'll be done? Next year, 2 years from now, 3 years from now?
I will get back to you. I gotta keep going on it.
Deadlines are your friend, everybody.
I
Deadlines.
know.
You're Dean, you're always working it, or you have a deadline tomorrow, probably, don't you?
I don't know what my art looks like without a deadline. You give me a free time, I'd be terrified of what I might draw.
Yeah.
So Gina also, Alan Dorson asks, how did you color this piece?
Oh, it's watercolor.
Is it one piece whole, done on one piece of paper, or like in segments that you married together?
No, it's done on one piece, but
Amazing.
I kind of cheated a little bit though, because I did a line drawing, a very fine line drawing of the whole thing. And then I made a print of it on watercolor paper.
Yeah.
because I was afraid I would screw it up. And then I built
That's not-
up inks
Yeah.
and then watercolored it.
That's not cheating, is it? I would think
It's
that's
not.
pretty legitimate. I don't know. What does everybody else think? I don't think that's
I don't think you can cheat.
Okay, good.
Dustin Rogers says, Gina, such great expressions in this piece. It's so fun.
Thank you.
Joanne AC says, congratulations to all. Love to hear from the artists and their motivation and inspiration. And Joy Mackin says, that's one great sploosh in the cereal bowl.
Thank you. I like that sploosh.
And Dustin Rogers says, Onur, it's great. The storytelling is great.
He's full of shit. He's just trying to patronize me. I don't believe him for a second, you know? I'm just kidding. That's very nice. Thank you for saying
Okay,
that.
that's between
What's Dustin's piece? Can you remind us what Dustin's piece is? Which one is his? Dustin Rogers?
are you there?
Dustin, chime in for Christ's sake.
He's just here to check it out.
To observe,
Yeah.
right? Okay, gotcha.
He's been participating in this weekly drawing thing along with Anthony Daniels and me. We do.
Yeah. Okay. Is he shy? Or is he not even paying attention right now? Is that what it is? You know.
He lives like in a tropical paradise, so he might be busy.
He's probably doing. Yeah.
It looks like Richard wants to say something.
I have a question, and my question really is, what keeps you up at night? If things are easy, what's hard? What do you have to figure out that takes a lot of thinking and a lot of working out? I address this. Give me a minute here, okay? I'm a sculptor and a painter, and I work sometimes very freewheeling ways, sometimes in very planned ways. I'm quite well trained technically. I've done a lot of figures, representational human figures, and I'm pretty well trained in drawing. And I admire the drawing, especially that you have. But I couldn't help thinking when I looked that where there's really very great differences is in how you divide the panels, the divisions that you use, and what those probably have to do with storytelling. Now, I'm a stranger coming into this. I don't know anything about it at all, but I'm trying to understand some things about what you do. And one question that I have is, what is the thing that's really hard to do? What's tough? Not what's easy, but what's tough?
For me, it's the storytelling. It's figuring out how to take that blank page and cut it up, like you said, and make those divisions. And what's a small panel? What's a big panel? What angle you're looking at? Why are you showing it in that way? How are you earning going from panel 1 to panel 2 to panel 3 to panel 4? How do you ending the page? Is there a mini cliffhanger so you turn the page? You're asking a question, answering on the next page. Like all these storytelling kind of tricks, but also at the end of the day, how are you connecting with someone, with a stranger?
Well, see, also something that I've wondered about, I think there's a lot of garbage in so-called fine art. And I think one of the big pieces of garbage is that praise is really the absolutely lowest form of criticism that there is. When people don't have anything else to do with so-called fine art, they start praising each other's work. And it's a terrible bore, and it drives me away, okay? What I want to hear is, what can somebody say that gets into it and that sheds some real questions about what's going on? Now, I've taught art history a lot, okay? And across the history of art, in teaching it, there's always the claim that there's a kind of a formal history to art. In other words, that one style leads to another, that Impressionism led to Post-Impressionism, that Cezanne led to Cubism. Is there anything like that in comic book art? And I'm not saying that there should be. And also, what do you make of artists who work very much in sequence, like Goya, with the disasters of war, with the, what do they call them now? The kind of visions of Goya, where they are sequential, okay? Or what do you make of an artist like the German artist, Otto Dix, with his terrible visions of what it was like to be in the First World War?
I like Otto Dix. I'm more of a Max Beckman fan myself, but and he was, I know he gets thrown in with German Expressionism, but he apparently wasn't a German Expressionist.
See, that's what I'm asking. In other words, is there any, I'm not saying that categories like Expressionism, Abstract Expressionism have any real serious meaning. But what I'm asking is there any kind of approach to making comics where somebody decides, I'm going to be more expressionistic, or I'm going to throw away some of the training that I have and try
That
to.
happens all the time, because what we all do, I believe, as creators, is we admire what we like and then we try to copy that. And what your style becomes, I've been told, is what is your failure of being able to copy something, and then you arrive at how you do it.
Very
Right?
interesting.
So, and also and yes, in comics, there are definitely progenitors of the form, people who create, a certain visual lexicon for telling the story or showing story. I always say showing story because it's a visual medium. And so, what comes before, you learn from that, and then you take that kind of narrative baton and you run with it if you so choose to, right? Because at the end of the day, nobody put a gun in our head. It is a calling, right? So
You
we take art because we have
to see how somebody handled something.
Say it again.
Are there great comic book artists? In other words, are there?
Oh my God.
It's Dick Tracy, the man who drew.
Yeah, Chester Gould, of course.
I'm going to look at that at 1 o'clock in the morning to try to see how he solved that problem, or how
Sure.
he not kept something going.
Yeah, I mean, there are many, there's thousands of great cartoonists that have contributed to the form in a way that's undeniable and that you can always learn from. I learned from the new people I never saw before their art in this show, so you got to be open to it, of course. And then you decide as an artist and how you're going to use your time. How do I want to crack the code of my own stories, So, but no, I mean, there's so many. I mean, that's who are the Mount Rushmore of comics? Everybody will have a different answer of.
I'm sorry, who's the what? Who's the?
Oh, there's always the discussion of like, who is the Mount Rushmore of cinema, comics, prose, whatever.
But most people would say Will Eisner, right? In terms of
Will
the
Eisner,
modern.
Jack Kirby,
Yeah.
Who?
Yeah. I mean, there's
Alex
a lot of,
Pope, but nobody knows who that is. Yeah.
but there's probably, but most real sequential graphic novelists, there's probably a top 10 that everyone say these are or a top 5
Sure.
probably of
Sure.
these are the ones who,
Sure.
are, create. But
Yeah.
again, hieroglyphics though, going back to hieroglyphics, to the artist who's talking in the blue shirt, Richard, you're a fine artist, right? So you never, so here's the thing.
See, I really don't make a distinction between a comic book artist, a fine artist, an illustrator.
But I would say
I
this.
just don't make a distinction.
But wouldn't you, even from the beginning, but what was fine art when it was put on the wall? When in the 17th century, 16th century, 12th century, 9th century, when it was put on the wall, the juxtaposition of paintings on a wall became in a way sequential art. Like to me, the gallery becomes a living comic book when you go into it.
In other words, I don't have any idea that there is anything that separates fine art from comic book art, except that fine art, you get to listen to a lot more bullshit from people.
Sure.
That's the big.
I would, explanation.
I would argue though that galleries and art in galleries become sequential art. That is, it becomes, I've never thought about it. Juxtaposition is everything. That's what makes comics strong,
Ever heard the story, The Emperor Has No Clothes?
Well, that's all fine art to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah. When people can't draw or paint, they talk.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying anything right now.
No, but I mean, to me, it's interesting too, that part of what you do is in a sense talk. It's the story. That the story is part of what you do. But I think there have been other artists who had that same approach. Like, I don't know, where would you put Daumier, the great French newspaper illustrator, painter? Does he belong in the story of comics? Does he belong in the story of fine art?
It's funny you should say that, because every time I have that question in my head, I always go next door to Ellen Chews and I ask her.
Okay, I'll have to do that.
Ellen, come on, bring it.
Don't involve me in this, Dean. Don't involve me in this. We've never had a conversation about that. We like to talk about the elevator.
That's true. That's true. We talk about the elevator, which does, it has a certain narrative because it goes to different floors.
Constantly, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So, hey.
And it's a plain space, yes.
I think the piece of the swing is absolutely fine art, and I think it's brilliant because the idea of going forward and there's a positive kind of thematic to it, and then going backwards, or whatever I can't remember the actual, but it was negative going back, positive going forward. And I just thought that's such a strong piece, and the simplicity of it and the storytelling of it and the magnitude of it, I think is absolutely beautifully rendered, very excellently done art. What are the pieces? The swing piece. Did you see the swing piece? The lady going forward, the lady going back. I just think it's so.
I did not. I'll tell you, I'm in my studio and I've been setting up an easel. So
show us what you're painting. Show us what you've been painting.
You're gonna have to
let's see it. Let's bring it out.
You're going to have to come to the gallery to see the piece.
Oh, I'll see it there.
It's really interesting.
Show us a piece that you like. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I'm going to have to wrap us up for tonight because we're running over. I want to say I think we've figured out that art is art, and that
I agree with
times
you.
are changing, and it's really wonderful that every art form can be admired and appreciated. Susan, did you want to say something?
I wanted to say something. I went to art school, and I remember not really understanding or knowing what the undertones were, but there was all this like judgment about, this was art and that was art and this was craft and this was, not high art and this was low art, this was high art. And one of the nice things about getting older is that I really have now sort of a broader perspective on just art in general, and I find that all of that is really ridiculous. Good art is good art, and if it moves you and it makes you think about things beyond your mind, it's great art, and that's what this show is about. This show has work in it that brings me to a place that I never expected to go. So I just want to thank all the artists because it's a great show and it is great art. So thank you.
Even looking at it online, it's a wonderful show. Yeah.
So I just want to say, be sure to make it to the show, and please take note that we have a special show coming up in August. It's called Body Politic. It's curated by Amanda Michelle Brown, our director, and it's going to be up from August 4th through August 27th. And Amanda can tell you more about it, but I'm really impressed because she has selected artists that, let me have a quote here, 10 artists who exist in bodies politicized and marginalized within the US and were invited to exhibit figural works. So it sounds fascinating. I can't wait to see that as well. And I'll also point you in the direction of our show that when we start our season in September is going to be my solo show, Nature Nurture. And we'll have David Stock, Juliet Martin, and Joanne Acey in Project Space. So something else to look forward to. Thank you all. Thank you, Dean and Whitney, for during the show and being such great speakers for our artist talk. And thank you to all the artists who talked and who didn't. And have a great night.
Great. Thank you, Karen. And everybody who made this possible.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks so much for having us on the show. Thank you, everyone.
Good
Good
night,
night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.